All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Book of Nook Show. My name is Kyle Colley, and this is an episode of Author Talks, a podcast about hearing the behind the scenes, the stories, and the visions of writers and their journey in the writing process. Today, we have a special guest and one of my good friends, BJ Thompson. BJ Thompson is a life coach, a speaker, an author, along with his Grammy Award-winning artist, one of his good friends, Lecrae. They helped build one of the largest faith-based movements in recent history, the 116 movement. He is an executive director of Build a Better Us, a growing growth and personal development nonprofit, and he has led thousands of professional athletes, entertainers, global influencers towards transformation. He's a father, a husband, a compelling speaker. He has an orphanage in Africa and a three-time author. Welcome to the podcast, BJ. If I miss anything, let me know.
You good? Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
No, it's good to hear, man. I just want to kind of start with your background, like what inspired you to write the story, and what you kind of hope to get people from it. Because the book we're talking about today is called Awaken a Better You. So I'd love to hear your insights while you're writing the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me on the podcast today. You guys are doing incredible things. My background, I was born and raised in Dallas, Texas. I'm not a Cowboy fan or a hater. Was born to a mother who had me at the age of 17 years old and a father who left school in the 10th grade. And I grew up in the middle of, they call it the war on drugs, right? Gang culture, the war on drugs. And so a lot of my early kind of development was that I saw a lot of chaotic volatility on the outside, but I had a lot of love on the inside. And so my home was always ordered in peace and love. But outside would always be, anything could happen at any time. And so when you grow up in an environment like that, you really can, there's a saying that goes, you can only be what you see, you can only become what you behold. And what I realized was much of what I could see was people were simply just trying to make it day by day. Okay. Well, it wasn't until I left high school and went to undergrad an hour away that my eyes were open. I realized that everything that I had learned in that environment to survive, literally driving 45 minutes, an hour away in a different environment, nothing about what I learned translated. And this is when it hit me that I only had survival skills for a street. I had survival skills for a neighborhood. I did not know how to navigate life. And in my time of becoming, what my business profile says, a life expert, I realized that had I known certain key principles, values, or really just a framework for growth, I would have been able to transcend and not drown the moment I entered a new environment. So that's what really inspired me to write the book, is to make sure that people like myself and others from different environments had key resources that would allow them to experience transformation despite a new environment.
Yeah, and when you're in those different environments, like who are some role models, people that kind of looked out and made sure that you're staying on that right path, and how did that help with your transformation, even to get to the point where you are now, where you're giving back in Africa, with the orphanage, as far as your faith-based movement? Like how did some of those role models in the early days kind of keep you on the right track?
Good. So some of my early role models, honestly, it took a while. Actually, it was after he passed. My father was one of my role models. I actually didn't realize how much of influence and impact my father had made on my life, because much of what he had done was he was just very quiet. My dad is very quiet, funny, but he never played. He always was like to his business, and he really gave me a model to follow. Put your head down, work, take care of the people you love, and make sure you stay on top of things. I'd also say, I watch TV, so of course, all the movie stars, right? So I love looking up to. I just said this in a recent podcast. I said that one of my favorite people to look up to was Bill Bellamy, right?
Okay.
And not Bill Bellamy as the actor, or not Bill Bellamy as the person, Bill Bellamy as the actor, right? He had a movie called How to Be a Player. And it was one of my favorite movies growing up. I love watching this movie. And it was just basically about how Bill went into this environment. He had, different relationships with young women, but he was able to navigate, all of the chaos and still came out on top. And so I loved, it was one of my favorite movies of all times. But essentially what I would say is I quickly got to a point where I didn't have role models.
Okay.
Right. So I started growing so fast, changing so quickly. And my aptitude was so high, I didn't have role models. I didn't know who to look up to. Right. I was taking different pieces from different people. And I had not learned yet to look back. Right. This is one of the key things, the audience doesn't know this, but one of the key things about our relationship was, you really put me on to just reading deeply and diversely. And because of our relationship, once I started growing and reading vastly rich history, then I could pull from historic examples, not just examples that came from my neighborhood experience.
Yeah, me and Chris always talk about it. My other co-founder. It's just you got to have like a historical context. So you can put things on a lattice work of understanding.
Yep.
Otherwise, you'll think that where you're at today is just how things are, versus saying, okay, this looks like the 18th century. This looks like the 19th century. So like, I think that's a good point. I would love to hear from your book. Like you emphasize on 4 like key steps. You talk about lasting to like build lasting change. You have desperation comes first, then information, application, and then transformation. What does transformation look like for you? And has that evolved over your life as you've kind of grown as a person?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, well, let me just kind of qualify this. Mikhail, I've been in so many different environments, right? So I moved from the hood, then I moved to the rural kind of community, then I moved to the suburbs, then I moved to the inner city, then I went international, then I went to the prison, then I went to the boardroom, then I went to these large, events for billionaires. So what I started to learning as I began to get into different environments is that everybody's coming from their own version of the ghetto, right? Like I thought that living in the ghetto was limited because people only knew certain things and they can only go so far. Well, everybody has their own form of the ghetto. They get a certain amount of information that informs who they are and what they can do, and then you get stuck, right? And so for me, as I went to each new environment, I thought, man, I got to do something new. When in actuality, I realized that there are certain principles that are the same. They're exactly the same no matter which environment you go into or which stage of life you'd like to transition into next. And so the first stage I realized is that you just have a desire, right? You got to be desperate, right? I don't know if you remember this. E.T. was years ago. He talked about you got to want to breathe it. What was this illustration he talked about?
When you want to succeed as bad as you want to breathe, then you'll be successful.
Right. That's when you're ready. That's desperation, right? He said that when you want to, because he talked about someone being dumped underwater.
Yep.
And he said, how long can you hold that breath? Then he said, how bad do you want to breathe, right? He said, it's not until you want to succeed as badly as you like to breathe when your head's underwater will you be successful. And I think we discredit that. I think we think the pandemic taught us, right? Oh, you can show up and just come up with some type of Ponzi scheme or some online course or something. Man, what happened to those people, man? What happened to all the course creators and coaches from the pandemic, right? So they all gone, right? They were coaches and now they're gone. But what you realize is people often don't think they need to be desperate. They think they just have to have a dream or they just have to have a desire. When in actuality, it's desperation. You have to say, I want this to succeed just as much as I want to breathe. And what that means is you got to get clear on something, right? And so the principle goes, you can't just say, I hope this happens, right? You have to make up in your mind, this will happen. And you have to articulate why it should happen, right? Maybe it should happen because you're losing your house. Maybe it should happen because, you don't want to bring another generation to poverty. Maybe it needs to happen because, your body, you're sick and you need to heal. Maybe it needs to happen because you're tired of working in that job and failing and being underpaid. You have to get really clear. And this is the hard part. It gotta get painful, right?
Exactly.
Nobody wants the pain of this, man. We just want to grow with no problem. Man, it got to get painful. You got to keep going through that breakup the same way with the same girl or guy and learn that situation. And so the first principle is the desperation, because without it, nothing can change, right? We can give you all the right pieces, all the right information, all the right understanding, but without that very baseline of desire, or what we call it desperation or decision making, nothing will move forward.
Yeah,
what you think about that, Kyle?
Yeah, I was gonna say when I was listening to you talk, it kind of I'm reading this book about Martin Luther King, and it's like his whole biography. But one of the things that they talked about was when that Montgomery bus boycott was successful, he had to go around like hire organizers. So he had to get with A. Philip Randolph, and he had to get with Bynard Rustin, and they were literally like, all right, if you're going to be able to do this again, you're going to have an organizational structure. This can't just be something that was like a one-off thing. Like you actually have to build in systems, and you have to build in a religious background and all these things that like will keep this thing in line. But the same thing is true with what you're saying. When you're going for transformation, you have to be able to have these true systems in place. So whether it's desperation, whether it's more information or application to when you get that information, if you don't put those systems in place and put guardrails, you won't be successful, or you'll go back to your old ways. So I'd love to hear like you as a life coach now, like what first got you into it, and like how do you kind of build those barriers for other people?
Good. So what got me into life coaching, man? I'm the oldest of three. I learned every lesson the hardest way, right? So, the food, clothing, water, shelter, my parents taught me that, right? They provided those. Everything extra, I had to go get it. And I had to go get it in an environment where, man, I was the case example for school to prison pipeline. That was my neighborhood, right? Everybody wasn't bad. This is pre-mental health, right? So we weren't getting any diagnoses about being bipolar, you having ADD, ADHD. No. You just bad, right? So you go to jail. First you go to alternative school, then you go to juvenile, then you go to prison, right? And so I grew up in this environment where I really had to get it out the mud. I had to be sharper. And it's not even just about being smart. I had to get clear on where I was going, right? A direction. And so for me, the pain of just seeing, like, man, this takes so much. I'm doing everything the hard way. Man, I'm graduating in undergrad for 6 years straight. Take me 10 years to start making money in business. And it's taking me this long to do this. Man, that pain of being like, had I just had someone a few steps ahead with a simplified process, an easy application, it could have saved me. The things that it took me 10 years could have easily taken me 10 months or 10 weeks had I had the right person in the community and information, right? And so what really drew me into being a coach was I didn't even know I had the gift of development until I would travel all over the world and people would notice, right? Because I can't fake it. It's hard to fake it when you come from a mom that had you 17 and a dad who worked on a dock, and you come from this neighborhood. You can't really fake certain things. So people would notice, man, when did you start doing this thing? And I'll say, I don't know, I just started doing it. And then I would take a sheet of paper. I would write down on the sheet of paper the thing you see me doing this, Kyle, from scratch, right? Something I've done. I'd hand it to someone. They bring it back. They go, oh my God, this worked. That's how I learned that I had to get the development, right? What drew me into becoming a life coach was at a certain point, I just started saying at a certain age, I began to look at myself and say, had I had someone in this position at my age with my knowledge, I would have been so much further in these different arenas. And so I started a podcast called the Build a Better Us podcast. It's actually relaunching this year, 2024. I'm super excited. Oh yeah, I'm super excited about that. And man, I just started getting listeners all over the world. People started contacting me, emailing me, messaging me. And it was like, can you coach me one-on-one? And as I got into coaching, this is kind of what I want to share with the audience. I felt something inside of me come alive, right? There's a story about this track runner. He ran in the Olympics, and he said that every time he would run, he could feel. He talked about, I think he said, this divine presence that was like hit the wings beneath him. And I never really understood what he meant. I was like, what are the things that you do? Like, how can you get to a point where you do something like track? I don't know if you ever ran track.
Yeah, of
Track is
course.
really hard, very stressful, right? Very tedious. But he said, I could feel his wings underneath me, beneath me. And I was like, man, how could you do something so excruciating, so hard, so challenging, that you find this deep sense of joy and it's almost like something is unlocked in you? Well, the first time I started doing coaching, I remember walking away from the session and I remember feeling like somebody had just turned something on inside of me. And I was like, what is this? Right? Like, I got really curious at it. And my client, they were like, I've never had anything like, I don't even know what this is. Right. So I got into coaching when I saw that my passion could meet someone's need and I could monetize it in a particular way. So
And when you were talking a little bit earlier, it made me, when you're talking a lot about agency too, because like the way you kind of almost have to align yourself with the vision you have and taking responsibility for what you want to accomplish in this life. What does agency mean to you, and how can like individuals harness that? I know that you talk about it in the book as well.
yeah, agency. It's a great point. You know, anybody with kids knows the moment of agency, right? So when you have a baby, a child, a baby is fully dependent on you. They don't have agency. You get the food. If they don't like peas, it don't matter if they like peas or not. They're gonna eat these mashed peas. Don't matter if they don't like a bottle or not. They're gonna drink milk. Everything in your life is decided from the day you were born, right? But there comes a point when you are a baby, a toddler, a child, a young adolescent, a teenager, where it flips. And now all of a sudden, you have your own will, you have your own desires, right? What is that? That's the beginning of one's own agency, right? We call it senioritis as parents. My mama called it senioritis, right? It's when you begin to realize this is my life, right? I'm not doing everything that you want for me. I'm doing what I want for myself. Agency is us recognizing our ability to have power, to have our own control over our own destinies, is our ability to decide, right? And it's so powerful that even if you have gone through hardship, it doesn't have to define you, but it can be used as a way to refine who you are, right? Agency is so powerful that if you go through all these things, like I'm defining very hard things, I don't look at them as a weakness. I just look at them as something that was shaping my strength. That's agency. I made a choice to view my circumstances that were difficult as something that are now made me stronger than most people.
Yeah.
And so because of agency is our ability to finally choose and decide. Most of us don't realize we have agency because we go to a job where they tell us exactly what to do. We go to a place of worship where they tell us exactly what to do, and we do it. We are in, certain relationships and tell us exactly what to do, and we do it. So in a lot of ways, we don't even know our own agency. We don't know our own power. We don't get to decide what's going to be good for us in this season of life because in so many ways, things are set on autopilot, right? And it's not until those things break down that you have an opportunity to redecide, right? That's the pandemic, right? Yeah. So when society breaks down, now all of a sudden everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, right? Because you're at home now. You don't want to go back to work. You don't want to be in the office no more.
That work from home is too nice now.
That's what I'm saying. You don't want to be in a cubicle. You want to work at home. You now know for the first time, I don't have to go in a job, sit in a cubicle. I can be in my underwear with a tie on, right? And some of y'all took it too far, right? Some of y'all, no, some of y'all was wrong. Y'all was wrong for what y'all did on Zoom. Y'all was wrong for what y'all, some of y'all mamas and what y'all got caught doing on Zoom, kids in school. Listen, but here's the thing. You realize you don't have to do that anymore because you get a choice. And so what agency is teaching people the power that they do have a choice. And then that they use that choice to better themselves in their lives. Yeah. What you think, Al?
Yeah, I honestly wanted to go into something when you're talking about agency, and now we're going to combine it, right? Because we're talking about awakening a better you, right? And one of the concepts that me and you have talked about a lot is this holistic approach, right?
Yep.
So it's not just having the physical body is in its shape. Like it's kind of like a train. You got to have mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally all in line so the train can go and carry those crates the way it needs to and go forward. So I'd love to hear like where like your overall holistic approach and why it's essential and how that plays into the book of Awakening a Better You.
So just kind of back to this thing of agency, knowing that you have control, you can decide for yourself. It takes you knowing that you can decide. Otherwise, your life is just happening to you, right? When you realize, oh, life doesn't have to just happen to me. Life can happen for me. You now say, okay, what do I need to align in? Then you ask, what do I have? Well, I have three things. I have a mind, I have a body, I have a spirit, right? Taking these things and saying, I'm not just going to get my financial life together, or I'm not just going to focus in on my body, but I'm not just going to focus in on my spiritual life. I'm not just going to focus in on my professional life or on my family. I need to begin to align these things to become a integrated person. That's one of probably the distinctions in my work is that I talk a lot about integration, that you have to learn how to do these things. It's a dance because you own them all. And I love that you use the example of a train. Each one of those carts, you know that if one of those carts is crooked, it'll stop the whole train, right? They have to be aligned and moving forward to give direction to the whole train. A lot of us are trying to compartmentalize, Kyle.
Yeah.
Right? We say it's too heavy to have all these carts here. Well, those are your carts, right? You cut one of those carts off. You cut off your spiritual life. You cut off your physical life. You cut off your emotional life, your mental life, all these different things. You're missing a huge part of who you are and what you need, right? So one of the things that we talk about is I talk about a lot of stories from my background and other people's stories, how they may have not started like that, but they ended like that, and how they begin to take agency to align themselves in this area, but then do so with very practical steps. Again, we can do all of the conceptual theory, talking, and everything else, but until you know a practical way to apply these things, you won't be able to move. And so we talk a lot about that because we know once you do that, you'll see a transformed version of yourself.
Yeah, and I love when you're talking about this concept of the ghetto, and that's why to that point where if you're not mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally in line, that's how you can still be in the ghetto no matter where you are, whether you're a millionaire, whether you're from the slums. Because if you can have all the money in the world, but if your soul's not in the right place, or if your heart's not in the right place, or you're mentally not there, you're gonna feel like you're as low as you can go. So I'd love to hear from talking a little bit about the faith part of things. Like, how has your involvement in faith movements influenced your perspective on personal development and transformation? Because sometimes I feel like people they say, oh, I got the spiritual side, so I don't need to work on anything else. And I know you do a lot with even helping people with their physical. So I would love to hear how you kind of balance those things and what you think about there.
No, it's good. I grew up, man, old school missionary Baptist church. Man, we got choir rehearsal on Wednesday. We got revival every twice a year. We go to church on Sunday, sometimes 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock. I just grew up in a religious culture. And for me early on, it felt like it was a relic from the danger, right? I remember I grew up in a dangerous environment. So it's like, you'll get your Catholic cross, get your rosary.
Yeah.
And you just kind of put it on your neck. And this is the thing to ward off bullets, right? Because they got bullets flying at you coming down the street. And so for me, that's how I initially viewed it. Well, as I got older, I began to get curious and just say, man, it feels like something is missing in my life. There was nothing wrong, nothing bad had happened. I just started recognizing that the direction that I was heading in, it just felt empty, right? And that led me into a journey of just seeking, right? And I didn't even have some type of guru. I didn't have a guide. I just started seeking. I was like, man, I need inner healing. There's an inner healing that I'm itching for that I don't know how to get, but I know it has something to do with this spiritual life. Long story short, 2 years later, I end up having this encounter, and this very supernatural encounter. And it was like one day, it all just clicked. I was like, oh, I'm alive, right? And I began to see that the wormhole, the things that I was walking toward, they were never going to give me what I was looking for. I was looking for peace. I was looking for life. I was not looking for pleasure. I already had that, right? I already had all the other things, the possession, the pleasure, that I wanted peace. And what I would say is the way it informed how I looked at the world, I realized that everybody had this inner hole where they were looking for peace, but they didn't know how to find it. It's like, man, we're looking for it in every other place, but the place where we're going to get it. And so what it showed me was, until you direct people to a higher power, you're really just wasting a lot of time, right? All roads are going to lend themselves back. They're going to all go back to, you're born, you live, you die. And that spirit is going to go somewhere. But that time from when you were born until you die, there is an accounting. There's something that is happening in that time, in that body. And so the spiritual life, the spiritual piece has been a big piece, because many of my colleagues in coaching, many of them are just kind of like, grind it out, work hard, don't sleep, don't do this. And I think what it does is make you compassionate. It makes you aware, but then it makes you humble to rely on that power for change, right? That's the AA, right? One of the biggest organizations in the world for rehabilitation. And their program is based off of, the first rule is, there is a higher power that loves me. That's the first rule, right? So it's in that creates a foundation for them to apologize, for them to restore their relationship, for them to hold some discipline. But you have to start with that higher power. And then I think all of that flows into the kindness, the compassion, the growth, and the transformation.
And then, so when you have that, and now you're building a better you, so you can, basically build a better us.
Yes.
And how does that flow into your more international things that you do with the orphanage? I'd love for you to talk about it, and what inspired you to do that and all that. So how do you bring your better self to the better world, I guess?
Yeah. So helping others. So now we're helping others develop. And that means you give people tools, right? That need tools. But Martin Luther King said it's cruel to try to tell a man with no shoes to pull himself up by his own bootstraps, right?
Yeah.
Right? And so what that means is, the least of these, oftentimes, they don't need tools. They don't necessarily just need frameworks and understandings and tools. They need practically things like food, clothing, shelter, education. They need exposure, right? And so what got me into the working with orphans is, I began to realize, like, man, I have a heart to see, like, the least of these flourish. I don't just want to work with executives and middle managers and business owners and entrepreneurs and coaches. That's fine. Man, what about those people? What about the people with no shoes, right? What about the kids that don't have access to an internet, right? What about them? And so what really got me involved is, I realized that when you operate from that level of compassion, it does something for you, right? We do a trip every year where I take people to Uganda with me. I'm actually going this year in October. Let me know if you want to go on this trip. But I'm taking people with me on this trip because I also want to connect others to that mission. I want them to see the country. I want them to breathe the air. I want them to get in the water. I want them to meet the kids. I want them to see the work so that they can learn how to incorporate charity as just a natural part of themselves, right? Not just go get in the bag, chasing the bag. It's like, oh no, charity, giving back here's another part of this integration, and it's birthed out of empathy, it's birthed out of compassion, but honestly it's just birthed out of you doing something for somebody else that can't pay you back, right? So that's what got me into the orphanage work.
No, that's great. I guess so. One last thing. So, what's one takeaway you hope everyone gets from your book? And then also, just because no one's ever, not too people, some people always have one of their biggest goals is to write a book. So, I'd love to hear just your writing process for people that are interested in writing their own books.
Yeah. So, there's so many resources now. There's AI. There's a ton of resources to write your own book. So, one big takeaway I just want you to hear: go pick up 100 copies of Awaken a Better You. You can find them at Barnes and Noble. Someone sent me a picture this morning. There's at Barnes and Noble. Send me a picture display of our book there. You can find it at Target, Walmart, or wherever books are sold. But I just would say you have to stop being afraid to try to risk it, right? Without risk, there is no reward. And the thing that you're afraid of doing is the thing you're supposed to be doing. That's what I would say. That's the bigger thing. And before my aspiring authors, Kyle, it took me a while to even see myself as an author. Because before you write your first book, you have no book experience. So it's very daunting to think that who are you to write a book, right? And so there is a shift you have to make in your mind to say, my story is worthy without me having to inflate it, pepper it up, salt it up. My story is worthy. My personhood is worthy enough. I think then you got to decide if you're going to self-publish or you're going to go get an agent and you're going to publish, right? Those are the two roads. I just started with self-publishing and I did really good self-publishing because I built an audience. And so one of the things I would just encourage you to do if you're an aspiring author, don't be afraid to get very narrow on your content and who you are and just build an audience, right? I mean, if you write something and there's nobody to buy it, then it's just going to sit on the shelf, right? So go build an audience, go be visible online, go do the podcast. This is why we're starting the podcast again, right? We want to get back visible in the public light and draw our tribe to us. But if you want to take the route of an agent, Kyle, sometimes that's a very, very, very long route. It's a hard route. And maybe you know someone, maybe you don't. And what I would say is if that's what you desire, have your proposal ready. Okay. Let me give an example. So I was looking for an agent for maybe 2 to 3 years. And I knew that this book, Awaken, I knew that I wanted to publish it, not self-publish it. I knew that. So I go to this event. A guy introduces me to a company, to an agent, his agent. And then the guy says, oh, well, just send me your proposal and da-da-da-da, and we'll talk. Within 10 minutes, I email him my proposal, right? Because it was sitting in my email. I already had it all mocked up. It's already designed, my deck, my layout, and everything else. And within the next 2 months, I signed a book deal, right? First, I signed an agent contract. Then I signed a book deal in 6 months. And so what I would say is if you're serious about publishing with a major publisher, whether it's Thomas Nelson, whether it's Penguin, whether it's what's the other ones?
HarperCollins,
HarperCollins.
Yeah.
Yeah. So whether it's one of the big five or whether it's some of the smaller publishing, stay ready. Get your stuff out there. Have your proposal already done, laid out. Go connect with the influencers in your field because you're gonna need them for endorsements. Those publishing companies are gonna want to know how many people can you reach? What's your audience? And I would just say, and be prepared to really work. You know, once you launch a book, it is a work, it is a job. You is not just writing a book. You are launching a project, you are marketing it, you are on platforms, you're doing podcasts. It's a lot of work. And then you have to continue to grow your tribe to get the word out and continue to promote that work on a consistent basis.
No, that's great, and you've been able to do it on both levels. So I knew you had a great perspective on self-publishing and traditional publishing. I'd say the last thing, because I know you also have you had two other books. You had A Better Her and A Better Him about relationships. Before we get out of here, I'd love to hear just your advice on relationships, especially in this new era where it comes to millennial, Gen Z.
Yeah.
It's a different conversation, but I know you've written a book on it, so I'd love for if people are interested in that book as well to search for it.
Yeah, so make sure you check out. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on a few. We actually have a few platforms. It's called A Better Him and A Better Her, and it's 31-day challenges that you can do. It's like a book and challenges that you can do with a friend, a spouse, or a small group. And what I would say is, I think that where we are in relationship, we're at a place of relational confusion because a lot of us have identity confusion. And when you have an identity confusion, when you enter into a relationship with another person, all you have is a doubled up confusion, if that makes sense, right? So it's like, you ever heard of two sickies don't make a wellie, right? Two sick individuals don't make a well relationship, right? If you as an individual are confused and unhealthy, it doesn't matter what relationship you get into, you're going to make the relationship unhealthy because you're not well, right? So my advice for this generation is you go get well first. You go awaken a better you, right? You go get a life coach. I love therapy. I love counseling, but that's for this inner healing and for you to work on your, some of your childhood traumas, abuse, and these memories. Coaching helps you with your practical skills and how you connect with others, your interpersonal relationships, your professional development, your personal development. Go get you a coach. Get yourself in a place to where you become healed and healthy enough that when you find you begin to step out into the market again, you attract that type of person, and then you can build a healthy relationship.
No, I love it. Thank you, BJ, for coming on to the Book of Nook show. I would love for you just to talk about some future projects as well as let us know where you can find you and anything else you want to talk about.
Good. So I'm working on another book right now. I'm actually writing right now. I'm writing 2 books right now. Very excited about it. I think just being an author has been very inspiring. Also, check out the Build a Better Us podcast. We'll be dropping some new stuff here coming up. I can't wait to just put out more content. I've had some time to sit back, to grow, become a better life coach, and just a better coach overall. And you can find me at bj-thompson.com. You can check out the Awaken online event conference, and you can find all my other information there.
All right. Thank you, BJ. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Till next time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.